Well, I've said before that the people and organisations responsible for orchestrating events such as this pandemic are capable of murder. And that is absolutely true. But the main reason that they are rarely held accountable is because the method of destruction that they rely on most frequently is manipulation of victims so that the victims either commit suicide or become dependent to the extent that they cannot function without a particular substance or some sort of support system that is created by the manipulator. And so ultimately, without that substance or support system, the individuals die. And so drugs are a primary tool utilised by the manipulators to gain control and to maintain control over individuals. And you can see this is the strategy of pharmaceutical companies all around the world. When they create painkillers, opioids that are readily available to people so that they become addicted to these substances, and the pharmaceutical companies can avoid liability on the basis that the consumer was responsible in effect for their own consumption of the drug and therefore their own deaths. What is being proposed now in the economy, whereby governments provide a support system, a financial support system to citizens, is the same methodology as a drug dealer supplying drugs to a user so that the user is forced to return to the dealer to obtain further quantity of the drug. Except the government is using money as the hook. And while it seems very attractive initially, the idea that the government will pay a flat amount to each citizen, a form of universal basic income, the result is that the citizen becomes entirely dependent on the government. And at the government's discretion, it can terminate supply of the resources to the citizen. Just in the same way that if a user betrays a dealer, a drug dealer, the dealer can withdraw the supply of the drug and the user will suffer and eventually die. Many of the people who have challenged the system have died in circumstances where drugs have been involved. And you can see that in this scenario, the pandemic, the solution is going to be presented firstly in the form of economic stimulus, which will be it will create a form of dependency between citizens and governments. You're also seeing a drug that will be developed and forced upon the population in the form of a vaccine, so that citizens also become dependent on the government and the pharmaceutical companies to supply the cure for this dreaded disease. because of the level of fear that has been created around this virus, most people will opt to have the vaccine. But there is still a battle in play as to whether this vaccine will be mandatory or not. In Australia, it's now been confirmed by the government that this tracing app will not be mandatory, which indicates that enough people pushed back against the government in this respect. And I can only hope that the same thing happens with the vaccine. Because once the economic support and the vaccine are introduced to the population, the idea that the citizen is fully dependent on the government for its welfare, while the government is removing the citizens' liberties, it's an abhorrent notion that cannot be allowed. Dependency is control. And with dependency comes the potential to always manipulate the supply to the controller's advantage. This level of power cannot be allowed to fall into the hands of a government or any private entity. And so it seems we're making some progress in some parts of the world towards resisting this forced dependency. And we can only hope that continues.